Welcome to the Strokecast. A Generation X stroke survivor explores rehab, recovery, the frontiers of neuroscience, and how to peel a banana with one hand.
Hello, I'm Bill Monroe, and welcome to episode 23 of Strokecast. This week, I'm going to talk about work analogies. You know, one of the reasons that our providers ask us to check our blood pressure at home on a regular basis is something called white coat syndrome. White coat syndrome refers to the idea that doctors who are often wearing, well, their white coats and other medical professionals in that uniform can be intimidating for some folks, or just going to the doctor's office can be intimidating. What studies have found is that when in the presence of the actual doctor, blood pressure for many folks actually rises, thus giving an overall inaccurate representation of what somebody's typical blood pressure is. And it's because of that completely unintentional intimidation of being in the presence of an expert or an authority figure for many folks. Plus, just the nature of being back in a hospital or being back in a doctor's office after what a stroke survivor may have already been through will produce its own level of anxiety, and that additional anxiety can also lead to inaccurate blood pressure results and similar things. The idea is sort of that white coat, that separate environment, it creates a level of separation between the patient and the medical provider. When we encounter a hospital environment following a stroke, for most of us, it's very different from anything we've dealt with before. We're suddenly thrust into this machine that is the medical industry to, go ahead and do silly things like save our lives and help us recover. But it is a world that has a lot of very specialized knowledge and specialized training that is alien to many of us. And all that specialization is, of course, very important for them to do their job well and get us the results that we want. And I'm reminded of this even when I go to see my OT on an outpatient basis today. My OTs keep talking about all these tiny little muscles in my shoulder that sometimes fire or sometimes don't. And there's no way I can even begin to keep track of all of those different muscles, those little ones and those little edges of the bone. And this thing is so important to keeping your shoulder in its pseudo socket and all of that other stuff. And if I have trouble keeping track of all of those, I only have to keep track of the ones that affect me directly. They have to keep track of all of the different ones in all of the different bodies that they deal with. And that is a lot of stuff, and it requires a lot of very specialized training, and it's certainly very impressive. But with all that specialization that the medical professionals spend years and years acquiring, sometimes it's easy for us to lose sight of the idea that the core concepts may not be so alien to what we're used to dealing with. I mean, what I've done in therapy isn't really all that different from the work I do in marketing and training. So today, I'm going to talk about these overlaps and how thinking differently about the medical industry can make all of this stuff more accessible and understandable. As you're listening to this, think about how things in your background can make it easier for you to understand and participate in your own or your loved one's recovery. And after that discussion, I'm going to go ahead and talk about some of the stuff that I'm doing on Facebook with Strokecast. To begin with, I have a background as a corporate trainer and product evangelist. Basically, I taught people how to sell computers and how to sell software to go along with those computers and how to sell TVs and all sorts of other things. So my industry was the intersection of marketing and adult learning. And in that field, we spend our time teaching folks new skills, new knowledge, and new abilities. And essentially, that's what physical therapists, occupational therapists, and speech therapists do. Except instead of teaching negotiation skills or conflict management skills, they teach walking, bathing, and swallowing. But at the core, it's the same. Both fields are rewriting the brain in some way. One of the big differences between the two fields, though, is the process by which we do that. On the therapy side of things, a lot of what we do is rote memory. It's repetition. It's repeating it. It's memorizing it. It's doing it again to carve those new pathways, to make sure that those cells that fire together wire together again and again to get that pattern. As my OT will say, it will take thousands of repetitions of a movement to really get that neuroplastic change that we are looking for. In corporate training right now, there is a movement against the idea of rote memory or rote drills and drilling and repeating the same information to make sure that workers memorize it all. There is some use of exercises to sort of practice a skill, but not so much on the practicing it over and over and over again. Instead, the focus is more on the why you're doing this, what you're going to get from it, what is the background of this process, and how you can look up that process more in the future. But ultimately, we're still doing the same thing. We're still trying to create new pathways in the brain to accomplish a different result than what we get today. What I think is really interesting, though, is that this difference means that there is an opportunity for some overlap between these fields, between adult learning and development and between stroke and neuro rehab and recovery. We're ultimately working towards the same thing with slightly different understandings of how we create new knowledge and new procedures within the brain. I think in the future, there's an opportunity for a lot more research in this area in what corporate training can learn from the stroke and neuro recovery fields and what the stroke and neuro recovery fields can learn from the corporate training field. And this brings me to the Addie Model. The Addie Model is the traditional model for corporate training for adult learning and development as far as how you go ahead and create content. So when we talk about instructional design, how you're creating a course, whether that's going to be delivered in person or whether that's going to be delivered virtually through a webinar or through online or through an ongoing program and an environment, regardless, it's built off and around the Addie model. And the Addie model is ADDIE. It stands for Analyze, Design, Develop, Implement, and Evaluate. So here's how that applies to training. Say we know we want to train our customer service reps on a new program that our organization is going to be a part of. First thing we want to do is we want to analyze the situation. And that A in Addie for analyze means that we need to understand where our reps are today. We need to understand what our learners already know. We need to understand where we want to get them, what the result is we want to get from this learning. We need to understand and figure out where they are physically located. Is this going to be something that we can go ahead and go on site for? Is this going to be something that we have to cram into a half hour? Or is it something that we'll have a full day available for? Is there a budget for this? Is there software and other resources available? Is this going to be an optional program for them or will it be mandatory? Basically, we need to analyze the whole opportunity around this training, what needs to be done and how we're going to do it, what the constraints we are working with are, and what freedoms we have to ensure that we get this result. And of course, as I said at the beginning of this, we need to know what that result is. So once we have that in mind and we have all of that core information, then we can move on to the first D in Addie, and that is the design phase. Now, this is where we take a lot of that information we have from the previous phase and we start turning that into an outline of what we're going to do. Here's maybe where we'll make those final decisions about, is this going to be a virtual training? Is this going to be an in-person training? Is this going to be a mix of the two? Are we going to have check-ins 4 weeks later? How are we going to design this overall? What is going to be our outline for this content? How are we going to introduce it? How are we going to transfer the knowledge? How are we going to assess it? We need to figure out all of these hows and whys and build out that detailed outline. This is often then when we'll go ahead and circulate that training plan around key stakeholders who may need to sign off on that. Once we have that design phase done, then we can move into the second D, which is develop. And this is where we actually go ahead and create the e-learning modules, the training modules you'll take online, or we'll go ahead and create the detailed lesson plan that will happen in that in-person training. We'll go ahead and create the PowerPoint slides that will go along with that training. We'll build out the exercises we're going to want the learners to do and complete, and we'll build out the actual assessments for that class. And then after we've done all of that, then we move on to the I in Addie, and that is implement. This is when the learners will actually go through all of that training. They'll learn it, whether it's going to be online, whether it's going to be in person. They'll spend their time there, and they'll complete that session, and they'll complete those modules. And then after they've completed that, and maybe in a couple of different ways, we'll move on to the E in Addie. And in the evaluate phase, this is where we'll look at things like, did we meet the result? Did the students learn the things that we wanted them to learn? Did they go ahead and implement those things on the job? Did they like the training? We want to go ahead and complete a full evaluation of how successful we were in making sure that this training initiative worked and that it delivered what it was supposed to. And then we can take what we learn in the evaluate phase and we can cycle that back into revisions by going through another Addie cycle if needed. And this cycle governs how a lot of adult learning content gets developed, delivered, and implemented and evaluated. Well, here's the thing about that Addie model, though. Based on my understanding of what happens in therapy, is that there is an Addie model going on there too. Now, the medical professionals may not use the same terms, but if you look at what happens as your therapist put together a plan for you, especially if that's going to be inpatient, is that they first have to assess your condition. Where are your limitations? What do we need to change? What is your current condition? What do we have to work with? That's just like the analyze phase. Then they can go ahead and start figuring out the therapy goals. What are they going to do? What are the different exercises that are going to make sense? Why are they going to do them? Where do we want to take this? Are we going to be able to do this inpatient? Is this something that has to happen outpatient? How is all of this stuff going to come together? And that's basically the design phase. Then they can move on to the development phase, where once they know those limitations and they have that general goal of what they're going to do, they can go ahead and start listing out the specific exercises they're going to have you do, or a specific pool of exercises that they're going to work with you on, depending on exactly where you're at that day. And then, of course, implement is when we actually go through the therapy and go through the treatment. And then, of course, evaluate, where our therapists are going ahead and completing their paperwork and reporting back to their colleagues and the rest of your medical team as appropriate for what's working and what's not working, what other problems are there that we need to be able to address, and what the future of your treatment is going to be. That's basically a formula that is working in the background or can work in the background, even if, again, the therapists don't necessarily use that specific structure. The core elements of the Addie model are still being applied to treatment in order to make it successful. But it's not just in the training model that I see overlap. I also see overlap in, more specifically, the sales process that I've worked with and the sales process that I have trained folks on in the past. I was talking to my OT the other day. He introduced the term affordance to me. And affordance is a term that the therapists use. It refers to a capability that something affords to you. So, for example, in his analogy, he talked about a chair might have metal legs, it might have a vinyl seat, and, that's one way to describe a chair. But that's really not what's important about the chair. What's important about the chair is that it lets you sit. It gives you a place to relax, to sit down, to get off your feet. That is the affordance. That's what it affords you the opportunity to do. And as he was explaining this, it occurred to me that that's a benefit. When we coach folks on how to sell products, and when I've coached folks specifically about how to sell computers, I focus on teaching them how to talk about the benefits. What does this device do for you? How does this device make your customer's life better? Because processors and RAM and hard drive and DVD drive speeds and all of that. Who cares? None of that stuff actually is what the customer is buying. What the customer is buying when they buy a computer is they're buying a solution to a problem. Whether that problem is they need a new way to surf the internet or to edit video or audio or watch movies or participate in Skype chats or whatever it is. Ultimately, it's the benefit that they are looking for. Those features are how they get that benefit. Those features may be how they justify that purchase. But ultimately, it's about that benefit and how it's going to fit into their life. That's what really matters. You can tell a customer all you want to tell them about the speeds and fees and the specs on a machine, but that's not going to sell the product. And that's because facts tell, but it's stories that sell. The stories about how that's going to fit into their life, helping a customer visualize that product. And that's what I've applied to selling software or selling computers or TVs or any other assorted things. And that's the thing, though, is that we can apply that benefit thought process to things like our arms, our legs, our communication skills, our ability to swallow, and even more. Ultimately, I don't care about my finger extensors. What I care about is being able to release my grip, to open my hand and drop something. I don't care about my hamstring muscles or my quad muscles. What I care about is moving myself quickly, easily, and safely to someplace else with little to no pain. Understanding the process and the structures is helpful, but it's not the ultimate goal. What we want is the benefit. What we want is the affordance that ability gives to us. When we do exercises with our therapists, they often take us through routines based on a plan to ultimately get our affordances back. In many respects, the principles behind physical therapy, occupational therapy, and speech therapy aren't all that different from sales and marketing or corporate training. So how do the principles behind these fields align with your own career? While you're thinking about that, let's talk a little bit about Facebook. I recently published a Facebook page for the Strokecast. That means when you're on Facebook doing all of your other stuff that you do on Facebook, you can hop on over there and listen to any of the previous episodes of the Strokecast. You'll also find some other stuff over there with some, less formal and a little bit less polished content. Because sometimes it's easier to just drop something over there versus going ahead and going to the blog for strokecast.com. I've also begun to take advantage of the Facebook Live video functionality on Strokecast. So I'm starting to do more live videos where I talk about different aspects of stroke and recovery and some of the more conceptual stuff that may be a little bit less specific than some of the stuff I talk about here, but you'll see those pop up from time to time. And you're welcome to pop into those chat rooms and ask questions and say hi and just generally engage that way on Facebook if that's where you're already interacting with a lot of your web content. In some of those videos, I'm doing some more of the practical stuff as well. I actually did a recent video where I actually demonstrated my one-handed banana peeling technique. So you can head on over to facebook.com/strokecast or just check out the show notes for this episode over on strokecast.com and go over to that page and check out the content there and go ahead and give us a like. And that brings me to the hack of the week. When I go to Starbucks, which I probably do way too often, but it's okay because now I'm only getting single-shot Americanos instead of 5-shot venti Americanos. I get my coffee at the pickup area, and then I still have to get it over to my table. Of course, one hand doesn't work yet, and the other hand holds my cane. So that presents some challenges in managing that cup of coffee because I haven't yet found that third hand. There are a couple of solutions to this. One is, of course, to ask the barista to bring it over to the table for me, and that is something Starbucks will do to accommodate those with disabilities. But since I can manage some steps without my cane, I can also sort of make it over there on my own if I just had that third hand. Well, instead of growing a third hand, what I did was I picked up a cane clip. And I found these on Amazon, and you could just go over to strokecast.com/cane clip. And that will take you to that page on Amazon via my affiliate link. These things just snap onto a cane near the top of it, and then you could easily clip your cane to your belt, your waistband, your pocket, or something else. And then my cane just sort of hangs from the edge of my pants as I walk slowly over to my table with the hot cup of coffee in one hand, and perhaps the bag with the cookie hanging from my mouth. But it is one solution for figuring out where do I put the cane when I want to hold something with my one functional hand. It's one of those things that is a surprisingly useful gadget. And there are actually a number of other accessories that you can find on Amazon that you can attach to a cane so you can sort of keep it out of the way when you're doing other things. So that's it for this week. How does your experience with the stroke industry compare to your current or your previous career? Go ahead and let us know in the comments over at strokecast.com/workanalogy. If you use a cane to get around, go ahead and check out the cane clips over on Amazon. Just go to strokecast.com/cane clip. Head on over to facebook.com/strokecast and click on the like button. And of course, as always, don't get best, get better. Thanks a lot. I'm Bill Monroe, and I'll talk to you next week.
The Strokecast, Bill Monroe, and Bill's guests provide general information and entertainment, not medical advice. Please do not make any changes to your treatment plan or the execution of your treatment plan without first consulting your personal doctor or medical team. The Strokecast is a proud production of the Currently Speaking Podcast Network.